Leader of National Citizens Alliance. I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. We're going to talk about NCA video that was taken out of Community Center, and we're going to share our perspective on this video. There's been a lot of misinformation, and we want to clarify that. But before I get into it, I want to make it very clear that the National Citizens Alliance condemns in the strongest terms the attacks in New Zealand against these innocent people. And these attacks against innocent people are the most condemnable in the strongest terms. This is unacceptable, this is sickening, and this is something we oppose 100%, and it has to end. This is all wrong, targeting innocent people. And about the video tonight, the purpose of that video was to create a dialogue on Canada's demographic realities and immigration policy. That was strictly the intent of it. The bottom line is, for us, it's all about Canada and our future, and we think every Canadian should have a say in that. It shouldn't be top-down politics. This is our future of our children, their children. We should all have a say. So we want a national dialogue on these important issues. I'm going to play a short clip from the video so everyone knows what I'm referring to. What's happening is with the mass immigration, the sustained mass immigration, a lot of these immigrants coming in, they're being used as slave labor, and they're being exploited. It's only the big corporation, the banks that are benefiting, and these corrupt parties in Ottawa that are getting votes. That's the reality. So there's that video. By all means, look at it. It's on our National Citizens Alliance Facebook page. It's also on our YouTube page at National Citizens Alliance. And like I said, the purpose of that video was to create a dialogue on Canada's demographic realities and immigration policy. Unfortunately, there were some of the comments were extremely negative. Some of them were threatening. Some of them were racist. And I'm just going to shed a little light on that. These are some comments we had. Like, it's just insane. The profanity. One person says, "Go back to Europe." That's ridiculous. That's like us saying, "Go back to India, go back to Pakistan." That's pure racism from this gentleman here. It's really unfortunate that people would stoop to that. And then they talk about natives founded and created Canada. We're going to talk about that because that's completely false, and we say that in a very neutral way to the Aboriginal people of Canada, but that's not true. And it's basically saying European settlers had no right to come here. And then they claim they shouldn't be here. So that's some of the arguments. And they're blaming European Canadians for what happened to First Nations. And they're talking here about white. They're bringing up white, which is racial profiling. In this other comment, a lot of swearing, really nasty stuff. It makes me question who's being let into this country. This nonsense about white supremacy, We run this, quote. So that's a bit concerning, taking ownership over an area. A lot of accusations of racism, threats. They're saying Canada's traditional population was Native American, Similar argument there. And then I'm going to go to this final one. And this is more about talking about British rule over India for 100 years, trying to take our land, divide the countries, it's all blame against the British and Europeans. And very insulting stuff. One guy, in fact, went on right here. He says, quote, this guy literally talks about blowing up the mosque. I was wondering if the police can do something about this. That's completely false. It's amazing that someone would insinuate that unless they're mentally ill. But that's mischief, making false allegations like that. So hopefully that's dealt with. But we don't want to dwell on those comments, but it makes us question some of these people entering our country, why they would be so volatile like that. But we want to get to the facts here so you understand them, and we can have an open dialogue. But, the bottom line that everyone needs to know, since the 1990s, Canadians have faced sustained mass immigration. It started under Mulroney of 250,000. And irrespective of which establishment party has been in power. And I'm going to get into the consequences here, but I have a couple images which show this. This is from pre-Confederation, 1860s. You can see around here, 1900s to 1910, there was a big upsurge of European immigration. Very little during the 1930s, 1940s. Even these weren't much. It was 150,000. But it was here in the 1990s under Mulroney. Even under Trudeau, it wasn't that bad. But it was under Mulroney that we got this sustained mass immigration. And it's just continued. Right here. You can see it right there. This block. And this is what's transforming Canada. And the Canadian people have had zero say in this. This is another image which shows it since the 90s. You can see it's just a solid 250,000 plus. Under Harper, 270, 260, 263, 267. Under Trudeau, it went up to 323, down to 270, 303. So it's not that much different from Harper. But you can see the sustained mass immigration. That is a fact. No one can deny that. Those are facts there. And basically what's happening is, with all the mass immigration coming in, the pie is getting smaller for all Canadians in terms of services. That's what's happening. It's making it harder on Canadians. The pie is getting smaller in terms of services, any kind of benefits from the government. And that's what's making a lot of stress on Canadians. There are less jobs for Canadians as more immigrants flood into the country. There's more people competing for jobs. And I've talked to immigrants about this. They can't find work. I've talked to traditional Canadians, same thing. This is causing stress. Wages have been stagnant for 40 years, with exception of minimum wage increases, like in Ontario, up to 14%. While inflation increases every year. This is adding more stress on the Canadian people. Mass immigration of tens of thousands of foreign university students are flooding the country. This is putting additional employment pressures on Canadian people. And the problem that we've discovered is that some of these students are working for cash under the table for less wage. So people can't find work. New immigrants, and this is a fact, are $40 billion taxation negative in terms of services consumed versus taxes paid. Again, this is creating a smaller pile, smaller part of the pie for Canadians. Whether you've been here for generations, whether you're a new Canadian, whether you're first generation, the pie is smaller for you. So there's all these handouts going to new immigrants up to $40 billion. It doesn't make sense. Our Canadians are getting left behind. And this is all due to mass immigration. 95,000 hectares of land, including prime farmland around towns, are bulldozed every year, largely due to mass immigration. So there's environmental impact. Housing prices are inflated and out of reach for young Canadian families in cities like Toronto and Vancouver. And this is largely due to mass immigration. And this is a fact, and I'm going to show the data now, but Canada's traditional population, which is comprised of European Canadians, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, are literally being replaced by new immigrants. This is a fact. It's happening. And I'll show you the data right here. This is on Canada's visible minority population. But you can see in 1981 it was 4.7. We fast forward to 2016, 22.3. And now with the sustained mass immigration, there's a projection for 34.4% of Canada's total population in 2036. That is radical transformation right there. And there's a projection, if this continues, by 2100, visible minority population will be 80% of Canada. That's what's happening. So Canada's traditional population under mass immigration is literally being replaced. And we can look at it from the flip side. If we look at the traditional population, 1981, 95.3% of the total population. If we go to 2011, it's dropped almost 15 points to 80.9. It's projected for 2034, 65.6%, and it's just declining, declining, declining. So there's a little organized replacement of Canada's traditional population. This is unprecedented in world history, that the government of its people would actually replace its people. It doesn't make sense, but that's something we can debate in terms of whether that's good or bad or what should be done about it. Ethnic enclaves in Canada are multiplying and expanding to more social division. And this is a fact. Go do your research in the mainstream media. Ethnic enclaves are multiplying and expanding. In our view, this creates more division in our society. There's less potential for integration. And there's potential for no-go zones. Don't come into our area. And based on some of these comments, you know, it looks like the area we went into is leaning towards a no-go zone. They're saying, don't come here. This is our area. What are you doing here? How dare you? So this is troubling. I'm going to shift to immigration myths now. And there's a number of myths being perpetuated in our society. And some of it's state propaganda. Some of it's through the media. But at the end of the day, it's misleading Canadians. The first one is immigration and mass immigration is good for the economy. All these establishment parties parrot that line. And they say, and it includes the GDP, it's good for the GDP, gross domestic product. But the bottom line, if you do your research, there is minimal correlation between immigration and increased GDP and increased individual per capita income. Immigration, another one, immigration is needed to deal with our aging population. You hear that all the time out of the globalist parties in Ottawa, every single one of them. But if you do your research, there's minimal correlation between immigration and an aging population. Because new immigrants age as soon as they get here, and through chain migration, they bring in aged immigrants. That's why there's minimal correlation. So why are they peddling these lies to the Canadian people? Another myth is Canada is a country of immigrants. And this is being perpetuated in the media, by the government, you name it. But if you look at the history of Canada, Canada was founded and created primarily by European pioneers, settlers, nation builders. And it should be noted, an immigrant is someone who comes to a country already established. Canada did not exist until 1867. Sure, the First Nations were here first, but it wasn't created till 1867, primarily by European pioneers and settlers. That is a historical fact. And I get to the final myth. Basically, it's the same thing. First Nations were here first. European Canadians inflicted genocide on them, which is, cultural genocide, which is partly true. Therefore, European Canadians have no claim or right over this country. So we get comments like, go back to Europe. But the bottom line that people need to understand, as I said, there was no Canada when the first European pioneers arrived. Canada did not exist. In 1867, Canada was founded and created primarily by European Canadians. Yet we have new immigrants in the country who are contemptible to European Canadians who created the country. It doesn't make sense. Yet they're benefiting from the country. And they're saying, get lost, get out of this country. You don't belong here. This is what's happening. It's nonsense. And these are some, I'm going to show you an article which touches on the exploitation going on. This is from 2013 under the Harper regime. And this guy, Jason Kenney, he was immigration minister, but he was exploiting immigrants up to $250,000 a year. And they're bringing all these immigrants in. Most of them can't find jobs. We can measure it with their education and skills they were selected for. And tens of thousands of Canadian educated graduates cannot find jobs either. This is exploitation that only suits the corporate sector, driving wages and worker demands down while profits go up. This is what's going on now and what went under Harper and any of these globalist conservatives. They are exploiting immigrants. They're exploiting Canadian workers to the benefit of these globalist corporations. And it makes a good point here about exploitation of temporary foreign workers. Employers get foreigners at legislated low wage than Canadians. This is how they're exploiting them. And many of the temporary workers leave at the end of their visas, and how many disappear into the underground economy, thereby exposing themselves to further exploitation and lower wages for themselves. It's terrible. The temporary workers are being exploited for the profits of these corporations, which are pulling the strings on these globalist parties in Ottawa. Immigrants coming in are exploited. They're basically taxation and consumer slaves, like most Canadians. That's what's going on. This is all about the globalist corporations and these big parties working for them. So we encourage Canadians to think about these issues. And there's one other thing I want to stress here. In 2015, Harper signed Canada onto, actually adopted Canada onto UN Agenda 2030. This agenda, which is mass and sustainable development goals, is being implemented across Canada at all levels of government. And it's seeking to transform Canada into a UN-like globalist village, which is devoid of a distinct identity, heritage, cultural norms, and values. UN Agenda 2030 is the main vehicle of this. So this is what's behind the scenes that is driving this. And if you look further into these globalist corporations like the Power Corporation, they support UN Agenda 2030. Not surprising, every single party in Ottawa is behind Agenda 2030. They're generally silent on it. They don't want to talk about it. That's the reality. But that's what's going on behind the scenes. So the question here, do you want your country turned into a UN globalist village? Is that the country you want Canada to be transformed into? Do you support this mass immigration, which is hurting most Canadians economically? Do you believe traditional population of Canada should be replaced, even though they created Canada? These are issues that we all need to discuss. As I mentioned at the beginning, the National Citizens Alliance supports a national dialogue on Canada's demographic reality and immigration policy. All Canadians should have a say on this. So we encourage your input, and we encourage everyone to stay away from racism, stay away from any hate speech, and just talk about the facts. And talk about the future of Canada, the future of our children, and their children. You know, National Citizens Alliance supports an end to mass immigration by reducing it to 50,000 or less per year. We support responsible, balanced immigration. We don't support overpopulating our country. We don't support turning it into a UN globalist village. We support bringing the best people for our country into the country to help increase our prosperity and security. That's the bottom line. That's what we support. We also do not support UN Agenda 21 and a UN Agenda 2030. We're a sovereign country. We would withdraw from these agendas. And it doesn't mean that we don't support some of the things coming out of the UN, but our citizenry comes first. Our sovereignty comes first as a country. And finally, we believe that the traditional population of European Canadians, First Nation, Inuit, Métis, should remain the dominant majority population. That's what we believe. They founded this country. Why should they be replaced? What will the country look like if they are replaced? Will it be the same? We don't believe it will be. But why should they be replaced? Why are we encouraging larger families, larger traditional families? So let's have a dialogue. These are a lot of issues, and let's keep them focused on the facts, and let's try to promote unity and what's best for our country. And I want to thank you for joining me tonight.